So next we turn our attention to what it takes to support learners in a meaningful way, and for that we have a dual presentation. Zoe Morgan, who's the Insights and Analytical Manager at Waihanga Aroro. Her data-led approach gives a very powerful lens on where the needs are and where the system needs to involve. And joining Zoe is Natalie James, who's a Senior Consultant and Mixed Methods Researcher, helping organisations turn data into action. Martin Jenkins. Okay, let's welcome Zoe and Natalie on stage.
Kia ora tātou. Ko Zoe Takawingawa, i te whatu whanake ahau ki Waihanga Aroro, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, everyone. I'm Zoe, and as you heard, I'm the Insights Analytics Manager with Waihanga Aroro.
And kia ora tātou, ko Natalie James Tokuingoa, and I'm a Senior Consultant at Martin Jenkins.
Today we've got the pleasure of taking you through a collaborative project that we've been working on between ConCOVE and Waihanga Aroro in partnership with Martin Jenkins. The project focuses on pastoral care and needs-based support for learners and early career workers in our sector. As we've kind of hearing today, pastoral care is nothing new, so kind of key topic for everybody, and has been discussed for many, many years. It still remains a pressing issue, though, for industry, for learners, and for providers. Since 2022, Waihanga Aroro have conducted over 150 interviews and participated in over 1,000 engagements with industry. And there's a kind of a resounding theme that comes through loud and clear: the need for stronger pastoral care and needs-based support. This slide contains an aggregated list of what we heard throughout those engagements, and pastoral care has also been reflected in the MB's 2024 Advice to Labour Market Ministers on the C&I sector, which highlighted improving access to pastoral care support as a key recommendation. Likewise, ConCOVE's research points to the same conclusions. The sector needs a more strategic, systemic and sustainable approach to pastoral care. One example that we heard about this morning is the report entitled Strengthening Support for Apprentices. It was just discussed in our panel led by Sarah Badley. That report found that apprentices who receive consistent and culturally responsive pastoral care are far more likely to complete their training and successfully transition into the workforce. Yet the current system remains fragmented and inconsistent, often leaving gaps between providers and employers. While we've seen and heard inspiring examples of good practice throughout our engagements, support is not consistently embedded. The appetite for culturally responsive, inclusive, safe and visible pathways and support is still not being met. Recognising this shared focus, Waihanga Aroro and ConCOVE began this project, and I'm going to hand over now to Natalie, who will lead you through the project details and the outputs.
Thanks, Zoe. Cool. So I guess it won't be news to anyone, based on the discussions over the last 2 days, that the construction and infrastructure sector faces persistent labour and workforce shortages. We've got many skilled and capable people working in the sector, but not enough to meet the scale of upcoming works. Modelling suggests that we'll need an excess of 200,000 workers by June 2027 to deliver on our national pipeline. And compounding these pressures is our ageing workforce, many of whom are already retiring, and not enough younger workers entering the sector, completing their studies and remaining in the industry long term. Ultimately, we're seeing more people leaving from the top of the pipeline than entering at the bottom, and the system isn't currently set up to replace them fast enough. Now, this graph shows that while this graph shows the employment pathways from a cohort of workers who entered the sector in 2018, and it looks at what happened to them over the following 5 years. And what we're seeing is that a significant proportion of the workforce are leaving their employment in the first 5 years. Specifically, 26% of workers left in their first year of employment, and only a quarter, or just under a quarter, 23%, are still working in the industry today. And so while we do see a small group of workers staying long term, it's clear that we're, as a sector, struggling to retain people past that 3 to 5 year mark. And this tells us, in line with the other research that's been conducted over the years, that these first few years are a critical window. And if people don't get the right support early, the likelihood of them leaving the industry skyrockets. So what are we doing to respond? So there's a strong evidence base that structured, culturally responsive wraparound support can help improve retention and workforce outcomes. However, we also know that currently the support system is fragmented, under-resourced, and not consistently embedded across the sector. Now, through our work, we're seeking to respond to these challenges by translating what we know from a huge body of research about effective pastoral care, and we're translating that into practical information about what we can do today, what we need to do to set ourselves up for the future, and making that strategic case for change clear. So our aim is to equip the sector with an accessible, evidence-based resource to strengthen the support in the workplace. Now that's just one part of it. We're also looking to provide strategic advice to policymakers to help unlock some of those system settings to embed this at scale. So I should say that we're a lot earlier in our process than some of the toolkits that you've seen today so far, so bear that in mind as we go through, but we'll be giving you a little bit of a taster or a sample of what the key insights are so far. So we're focused on developing a user-friendly toolkit for employers with actions that they can take immediately to improve pastoral care and needs-based support for staff. As part of this, and as our future focus, we're looking to do a gap analysis and produce a high-level capability roadmap to embed long-term change, fill the gaps, and increase support for continuous improvement. And as I mentioned, we're also providing a policy brief to government. While some employers might already feel like they've got pastoral care covered, and many are doing great work, the reality is that we can't expect industry to do this all alone, and indeed we've heard already today about the multitude of pressures facing employers. And there are many levers impacting worker wellbeing and retention that sit outside any one business or workplace. And so that's why part of our work is about providing clear evidence-based policy advice to government and agencies to help create the conditions. We'll also be documenting the totality of the evidence into a synthesis report so that it can be referred back to in the future. So a couple of points on how we're doing this. So as well as being evidence-led, we're taking specific lenses to reflect the needs of Māori, Pacific, disabled and other workers from diverse groups to make sure that specific needs are reflected back into the advice that we're providing. We're also making sure to engage with a variety of stakeholders across government, training organisations, industry, to make sure that we understand current practice, the key barriers or gaps, and how this work can support businesses practically. And we're also looking through a behavioural lens, so asking questions like, what are the mindset shifts that need to happen, and what are the key hooks or interventions that can inspire that change? Whether this is helping businesses understand the why, making it easier for them, or if it's something else entirely. So as I mentioned, where we are today is midway through our data collection phase, so we've gone through the documents, pulled out the key themes, and we're just beginning our stakeholder engagement to test and validate what the evidence is. And shout out, because there are a few people in this room who I've already spoken to or have meetings upcoming with this week, so thank you for your time. Once our interviews are completed, we'll move into a bit of a synthesis phase, analyse the findings, coming up with our frameworks, and identifying the behavioural drivers and gaps. We'll then come back to industry to test and make sure that what they've told us is what's reflected back to them. With this feedback, we'll draft the products and hand them over to Waihanga Aroro and ConCOVE to help share the information back with the sector. So what is pastoral care? And I'm sure everyone has a really intuitive understanding because it's not a complex concept. But I think what's important to note is that for our context, it's not really that well defined. Now we have instruments like the Tertiary Education Code of Practice, which provides us with really helpful clues, but that's very focused on a learner educator context and doesn't necessarily reflect workers outside of that. But anyhow, we've used that to come up with a working definition as the structured and intentional support systems and practices that ensure the physical, emotional, cultural and education wellbeing and safety of workers in the C&I sector. Now, this is helpful because it highlights how broad pastoral care is and all of the multitude of domains that it touches. It includes an organisation's wellbeing systems, the planning processes and the practices within an organisation. How an employer might capture a worker voice in terms of decision making, feedback loops or handling complaints processes. It also thinks about how organisations keep their people safe, included and supported, and keeping them engaged in their own learning and working journey. And finally, it's about how organisations might help workers, if they need it, meet their basic needs, support physical and mental health, and work and other proactive wellbeing practices. So we've already mentioned that the code relates to the tertiary education sector. And I guess some of us might be thinking, sure, we're employers, we are industry representatives. This doesn't really apply to us. And you'd be right, not technically, but we're suggesting that there is more opportunity to refine the workplace as a really intentional key site of pastoral care and worker support. But to do this, we need to support employers more heavily to be included in the matrix. If we extend the breadth of support for workers who are newly qualified or working in non-qualified roles beyond the apprenticeship boundaries, we not only improve the level of support available to those apprentices who spend most of their time in the workplace, but we also uplift everybody together so that we can have broader workforce outcomes. By focusing more heavily on pastoral care in the workplace, we can also reduce the risk that workers fall through the cracks. So how might, have I gone back? There we go. How might this look in practice? We've got a regulatory definition. There's a lot of work to do to implement that at a ground level. And so we've had a first go based on the evidence, what we're hearing from the sector, and we've identified a few areas of practical and really low barrier actions that employers can do now to strengthen support in the workplace. And this is just our really early starter for 10 on the types of actions that could be included and built out in a toolkit for employers. And our plan is to keep workshopping it with industry and to get to something a little bit more succinct. But anyway, in terms of the areas we've identified, a key one is welcoming, onboarding and offboarding well, make the first day count. A warm smile and small acts of inclusion can go a long way. This might be as simple as ensuring somebody has a uniform on day one so they feel like they're part of the team. They know where the toilets are and where they can take their smoko breaks. Offboarding processes can also be a really important opportunity to continue relationships with the workers. A well-managed exit interview can provide a wealth of insight about why that person chose to leave and where opportunities for continuous improvement are. Building trust is foundational. We've heard a lot about barriers that hold people back from opening up about what specific needs they might have or not feeling safe enough to voice those. And so we're really thinking about how we can emphasise taking the time to understand the person behind the role and who they are outside of work and the dividends that that can pay. Not only does that build loyalty, but it can help people open up to their employers about what they need, and vice versa, it can help the employer better understand their workers to identify needs on their behalf. Now, this might take time to build, and we've heard a little bit today about navigators or having a consistent point of contact, and that rings true in the research. But at the very least, it requires showing up reliably and consistently, responding to texts sometimes maybe out of hours, but it doesn't cost much to implement at that first start. Creating a culture of belonging, so this is focusing on team cohesion and shared values rather than individual performance. Can look like a group WhatsApp chat during lockdown or a barbecue before a toolbox meeting, and encouraging your staff to get to know each other. It can also mean being flexible to support staff members to attend networking events or participate in support groups outside of the workplace. Meeting people where they're at, we've heard that today before as well. And we've heard a lot of anecdotal stories about apprentices or early career workers showing up on their first day, not quite sure about what they're doing, and then copping a hard time for it. And so while there's no doubt that getting things right is super important on a work site, especially when safety and quality are on the line, it's just as important to create an environment where people feel safe to make mistakes, to learn and to grow. So training with patience is key to building these strong and trusted relationships. Meeting people where they're at also means not treating everybody the same, and the level and types of support will vary depending on the individual needs of that worker, and so making sure that we're able to adjust our approach and tailor resources appropriately. Prioritising cultural competency, I won't belabour that point because we've also talked a lot about that, but understanding and making space for different worldviews is something that we can do today. Understanding how people's value systems differ or align and making space for that. It could be as simple as learning to pronounce names of your staff correctly or bringing whānau into the fold. We've also heard that pastoral care isn't just about for those in crisis or who need that extra support. It can also be a big part of helping people grow. And so this means understanding team members' goals, identifying pathways or opportunities for growth, and placing value on soft skills like communication and teamwork alongside technical abilities. Employers don't have to do this alone, and I think a key theme that has come out from today, from the research, is that pastoral care works best when there is a wider network of support piling in, leaning in. And so this means leveraging the local support ecosystem, understanding what supports are available through ITOs, through government departments or local providers, building relationships with organisations like Mates in Constructions, and for those with apprentices, building relationships with and coordinated relationships with training providers so that we can wrap around together. Finally, formalise what works. We've heard that many businesses rely on informal approaches or systems with a bit of a she'll be right attitude, and this can be fine, but it also creates a reliance on individuals, not the systems, which means that it can be inconsistent. So the message here really is to codify good practice into really simple policies or checklists where they can be referred to and followed, and help businesses scale what works and ensure continuity even when staff change. So to summarise all of this, the couple of key things we would like you to take away is, well, how we're sort of pitching the toolkit in our current thinking is keep it simple, small things go a long way. Worker support doesn't have to be super time or administrative heavy or something so complex that we fail to launch. Instead, we want employers to focus on the small steps with large gains. Keep it human, understand and know the people, lean into soft skills, have the conversation, ask the questions, seek perspectives and solve any issues together. And finally, keep it up. Make support predictable and reliable so that workers know that employers have their backs. And this consistency can build habits and change culture little by little over time. And I'll just pass back to Zoe, who's going to see us through to the end. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm probably going to preach to the converted here, but there are gains to be made both immediately and in the longer term by adopting these pastoral care practices. So we know that the workforce challenges in the construction and infrastructure sector are urgent, and investing in pastoral care isn't just a nice to have, it's actually a strategic move with immediate returns. Providing pastoral care and support helps in addressing stress, mental health issues, and other personal challenges, leading to a healthier and happier workforce. When employees' physical, emotional, and educational needs are met, they are more focused and motivated, leading to higher productivity and better performance. When workers feel supported, they thrive. Improved employee well-being tends to lead to reduced absenteeism. People show up, they stay engaged, and contribute more meaningfully when they feel safe and valued. We know that retention is a real issue, and this kind of support can be part of the solution to fixing that problem. We've seen the high early attrition rates. Structured support helps people stay longer, and especially in those critical first few years. A supportive environment fosters a sense of belonging and loyalty amongst employees, which strengthens the overall company culture and promotes teamwork. We also know that support drives productivity and innovation. When workers aren't bogged down with stress and uncertainty, they're more focused, creative, and collaborative. That's good for business and good for the sector. And kind of an often overlooked part is also that employees who feel cared for are more likely to extend that care to customers, resulting in improved customer satisfaction and loyalty, which enhances your reputation as an employer and company of choice. While the immediate benefits of pastoral care are clear, the longer-term gains are even more powerful. This is about building a future-ready workforce. When we embed pastoral care and needs-based support, we're not just improving the well-being today, we're laying the foundations for a healthier, happier, and more productive workforce for generations to come. Businesses that prioritise care and support will be better equipped to attract and retain talent, adapt to change, and lead with resilience. If every employer embedded these practices, we'd see a sector-wide shift towards a more sustainable workforce, one that's diverse, resilient, and equipped to meet the demands of today and tomorrow. So that concludes the talking part of the presentation, and we'd like to invite you to share your thoughts on the project, to ask us some questions. And we also have an extra QR code, because one on the table's not enough. And this takes you directly to an avenue to give us some feedback, to get involved in the production of that toolkit, and also kind of highlight maybe some of the gaps that we're missing. Cura.
Thank you very much for that, and couldn't have said it myself better. So it is just fantastic to have some of the data informing where we want to go with our pastoral care. I'm going to let us do two very quick questions. We're a little bit out of time, so let's just go. Number one, has there been any coherent response to the lament that, like, regardless of what we do, people will still leave for Australia because of the almighty dollar?
Yeah, I can happily, Thank you. I'm just trying to look at my notes because I anticipated that question and I wrote down the percentage of how many are actually leaving to go overseas. And it's actually not as much as you might expect. So while anecdotally we hear that coming through all the time, we spend all of this time and effort investing in getting our people work ready and then they leave. And I think actually, when looking at the data, and I know that that's just an indicator, but what's actually where most people are going, and I think it's around 44% are actually changing industries within New Zealand as opposed to going overseas. So while I think it's important that we're looking at worker conditions and what can keep people in New Zealand, I think that's quite a targeted question. Would we actually be much better off thinking more holistically about how we can keep them in the sector? And I think we're also on a bit of a point, having spoken to some employers recently, where they're quite cognizant of the fact that the demographic of people going to Australia also have been impacted by COVID and the pandemic, and so it's a natural reaction to the fact that people haven't been able to travel, and hopefully it course corrects in the future.
Right. And then a final question. There was around cultural competence, the culture of whom? The trainees, the company, the country. What are you talking about when you talk about cultural competence?
Thank you. For time, we haven't gone into any detail about needs-based support, but that is a really important component of what we're thinking about. So groups within our population who'd have different outcomes or potentially face structural barriers to participation and success. So when we're talking about prioritising cultural competency, we're really talking about creating safe, warm and inclusive spaces for all sorts of diversity in New Zealand, whether that's migrant workers, whether that's Māori, whether that's Pacific, whether that's women, and what that looks like. And there are some really powerful examples of pilot projects or programs that have worked rather than focusing on the worker or the apprentice adapting themselves to fit a specific work culture, how powerful it can be to instead work with the organisation that's welcoming them in to create space for them to be who they are in a safe space, and then what that means for productivity and workforce retention. And so that's sort of, it was too big of a can of worms to include in 20 minutes, so forgive me for glossing over that, but that is a really important element of what we'll be exploring.
But perhaps just a follow-up on that, you were talking about building trust, and that we can all relate to as foundation for a good relationship. And have you been able to see in the data anything around barriers to building trust?
That's a really interesting question, I think, and it's maybe not data-driven, it's maybe more qualitative or anecdotal, but we hear a lot, the employers that know and are aware already do this really well. It's potentially some enduring mindsets around, well, I spent 6 months sweeping the floor, so now you're going to spend 6 months sweeping the floor. And so what we're really trying to trigger is hey, get it, that was part of your journey. But imagine how powerful it would have been if when you were sweeping the floor, you had someone come in, take you under their wing, get to know what your hopes, dreams and aspirations were, and supported you to realise that. Wouldn't that have been different? And that's also part of that intergenerational change, if rather than perpetuating perhaps some of these less productive mindsets, we're unlocking it, and then it has perpetual impacts for the next generation and the next generation as apprentices become trainers.
Great. Well, thank you very much to both of you, Natalie and
Thank
Zoe.
you.
It was fantastic to hear from you. And thank you so much for your work and for being here today. Great stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.